Madam Speaker, Mr. Vice President, First Lady of the United States, indicted co-conspirators, horse-faced porn stars I paid $130,000 to pretend they didn't sleep with me. The State of the Union is, Trump Report starts now.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Oh, that's right. We told you that you'd be able to catch us right after the State of the Union, but we've now entered day 2 of the State of the Union. Once again, barring the title, America Held Hostage. Welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Christian Bladt, and joined as always by Chelsea Galicia.
Hello there.
And a wonderful, joyous occasion because it's an opportunity to visit with our friend Drexel. Oh, Drexel,
Hello,
thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
Great to see you as always. So we don't quite know how the State of the Union ends. You know, it's kind of like Lost. You know, you're not really sure what happened, but you know that nobody's happy with it. For what you saw, you know what? Let's try and be, I don't know, glass half full, silver lining. What did you see as a plus for the evening? If you don't want to give the credit to the president, you give the credit to someone else. What did you see that's positive? You have copious notes there.
I do.
And you're like struggling.
Practically like taking a transcription of the whole thing as it was going down. I thought, okay, I'll be the token woman on the panel and bravo to
Which is why you're here, because it's
yeah,
tokenism.
thank you.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, that was a fun, if that could be a real word used to describe any part of the State of the Union, when Democrats were up and applauding, and Trump said, "Don't sit down yet, you'll like this next one," and talked about how. Was that when he talked about more women serving in Congress than ever before? Right after he talked about that the economic resurgence has benefited women because 58% of the new jobs created in his economy, he believes, went to women.
Yeah, I mean, I think what he said was like, girls, stay on your feet. You're gonna like this. This is a good one. Yeah, but I mean, it is a valid point. Maybe he didn't make it articulately. I did like the similar. Whoever wrote the speech noticed, like, wait a minute, women have been allowed to vote 100 years now. I got something I can say about that. What do you think about that point being made in the State of the Union, Drexel? Maybe not the way that the president mentioned it, but.
I mean, listen, we already know who wrote the speech, and Stephen Miller, of course, being the architect of the president's speech. For
Wait,
the
are
past
you
2
sure
years.
the panel on Fox and Friends didn't write this speech?
They helped.
I'm pretty sure that they outlined the topics and in the order. I think if you had watched Fox and Friends today, and I think that's a 3-hour show, it would make sense, because the way that as it went on, he just continued to throw in another topic and another topic. And you're like, where did that even come from? But anyway.
Yeah, I think what worked for the president in the situation that he was in with that particular House, and the way that the Democratic women of the House were very unified, not only in when they clapped, and Mother Nancy was up there making sure that everybody was on the up and up. It worked out for him that he used them. He was able to use that part of his speech to kind of get them off their feet, because it was like a white wall of Democratic women out there. And I think that allowing them to be a part of that actually worked to his advantage in that particular section.
And
Then
obviously
he got
making
the USA?
he got the USA champ, but the president
Right.
just finished right now.
Oh.
He's done now.
Wow.
So that was the 45 minutes that were scheduled.
Like an hour 20.
Yeah. So, we commented a lot during the broadcast while we were watching it. Nancy Pelosi kept shuffling through the papers. I think sometimes it was just like, how much more of this is there? And I don't know. I mean, what's the decorum on, like, you sign that, you hand it to her? Can something different be loaded in the teleprompter? Because was there more?
I know.
Did they forget to give some pages? We were a friend here from AfterBuzz, Tehran, was talking to us. He was watching it over our shoulders, and he was like, "I'm pretty sure he's got the pages out of order." And it felt like that, by the way.
Right.
That, but I don't know. What's can you give Pelosi, the speaker? Can you give the speaker like a rough draft? And then you're like, yeah, but the real speech is still top secret.
Well, the president always hands the vice president president and the speaker the draft of
Right.
the speech.
I've never seen them look at it before.
I've never seen them look at it before,
Yeah.
and it seemed that Nancy, that Speaker Pelosi was definitely trying to figure out where this was going, because Donald Trump is known for going off script, and it's very possible she was watching the prompter and trying to figure out how to follow what was coming up. But at the same time, he still, like, by the time that we came in here, he was still 5 pages deep.
Yeah.
He still had 5 pages left. And so from what we saw with Nancy kind of shuffling the pages. But I think that's pretty much what happened, because if you followed this speech, there were some things that was just a lot of ramble and a lot of anecdotes, and that was unfortunate. And I was texting with some people during the speech, and I said, it kind of felt like a third-year address. Like there was no new policy initiative that normal presidents use during their second year. And he spent a lot of time not kind of glossing over the initiatives that he should have expanded on, and then spent a lot of time on immigration as if it was a topic that was that it was a topic that he knew wouldn't move at all.
Right.
But he spent almost like 20 minutes just talking about the same things that he's been talking about for the last few weeks, instead of trying to figure out
That's his
how
specialty.
better to, instead of trying to figure out how best to move the needle with Democrats as the House majority.
I got the impression that he, before we were really into it, I got the impression that he was like legitimately focused on the schedule and the time, because he walked in and I think it was like 6:03, and look, presidents of both parties, sometimes you saunter in 12 after, you take your time. Sometimes there's a lot more, hands to shake and all that. And I'm like, oh man, he's getting right down to business. But yeah, it was an hour 25 or whatever it was exactly. The other thing that surprised me, and I don't know, I wasn't here with you at the beginning. I was listening on the radio like an old person while I was in the car. But you always wait for the speaker to introduce you. And he just started talking. Now, I don't know if that's conscious effort, because obviously it could just be him not realizing that he was supposed to do that. But it could also have been a little bit of the gamesmanship back and forth with Pelosi. And it seems like a minor thing, but she seemed legitimately surprised by it. Chelsea, do you think that he consciously was like, I'm not letting her talk?
I actually have no idea. I could have forgotten. Yeah, I Drexel commented it to me that's how,
Yeah.
decorum usually is. It didn't really, I don't know, surprise me. I didn't remember that. I, strangely enough, wanted to hear just like what was in this speech, knowing that the conclusion of the speech, which he said it in the middle of the speech about the union being strong.
Yeah.
And I was really listening for how he was going to measure that. And I guess it's maybe unfair of me to expect that he was going to use some kind of objective measure to measure that, because I'm not sure if any president in my lifetime has used an objective measure to really, how do we tell if the union is strong? And to me, it seems that because he believes the economy is doing well, that the state of our union is strong. But when you look down on a personal level, how is the economy, the personal finance of most Americans going? It is not good. What is good, you could say, is the GDP. And he kept talking about how we're the hottest economy in the world. We are the envy of the world. And so if that's how we measure the state of the union, what other people think in the world about our economy, and that's what makes us strong, I want a new measure. Is anybody with me? I hope the Democratic platform includes a new measure of the state of our union is strong, because this measure is not working for me.
Yeah, I think he talked about the bills that were passed within the last year that he felt have made an impact. The opioid focus on the opioid crisis, the farm bill, the VA reform bill, and the VA accountability. Like those are the things that he kind of, and then criminal justice reform, of course. So, but it's interesting to hear the president's rhetoric about where we are as a nation outside of the prompter, and clearly he doesn't believe that the State of the Union is strong if he is pushing policies where he believes that are keeping our nation from being strong, especially on the topics of immigration. So I thought it was a little weird. I was just reading, it's not surprising.
Like you should said, like the State of the Union is almost kind of sort of
Right.
strong.
Especially with the theme of choosing greatness. So I think he could have like stuck with that great theme that he, that Make America Great Again, but the theme was choosing greatness.
Killing it.
But not surprisingly, Megan Kelly tweeted, nice finish, solid speech, not a game changer, but these things never are. Trump wins just by being up there looking presidential. And if that is not a sign that this speech was terrible, then that's the measure right there. Because if somebody says, well, he just got up there and looked presidential because he could read off a teleprompter, that is what Republicans and pundits on TV have said every time Donald Trump has got up there and given a speech where he is able to read. Like, it's crazy because he didn't say anything. The entire hour and a half, he didn't say anything that was new and bold.
Except that he's got a hot date with Kim Jong-un.
Right, and he used other people, whether or not it was Buzz Aldrin, whether or not it was those people, to fill this time where he could have spent trying to talk to Democrats about policies that work for them. He spent zero time on infrastructure. The one area where Democrats probably could have come to the table with him and said, this is what we want. He literally skipped over infrastructure.
That was my observation as I was driving over, is that he started off with, sort of talking about crowd pleasers. He was talking about veterans from World War II. He's talking about Buzz Aldrin. Who's not going to clap for Buzz Aldrin, Right. And then later, towards the end of the speech, as we were getting set up, he was speaking about Holocaust survivors in relation to the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. So, there was the nice moment with the young girl who survived cancer. So, yeah, and look, every president calls to people like that. But there's definitely some crowd pleasers in there. There was also some things that were specifically put in there for the base, which we'll talk about. I did notice that Nancy Pelosi, and look, the opposition has plenty of opportunities to not stand up. But what I did notice, there were times where she would clap but not stand up. And I was thinking, I think I even said this to you guys, is that if you were playing a drinking game where you did a shot every time Pelosi stood up, you would not be drunk and you'd be able to drive home. There would be no problems because she stood up so rarely. And when she did, it was like, oh, I gotta stand up for the Holocaust survivors, of course.
That's because it's like, yes, that sounds good, but there's a whole lot of buts behind it that I can't explain right now. So I'm just going to give you the half clap and no standing. But I was dying to look to see the faces of the House members when Trump was going on his rant against socialism. Clearly, some people have gotten under his skin.
They showed your friend Bernie when the cameras showed that. And I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not get shown because of seniority. I think Bernie gets to, he gets the nod over her.
I was... If there was a surprising moment, I was surprised by how forceful he was about that he would even bring it up. Like usually if you're a sort of, the enemy is too weak to even mention what their goal or goal is. And I think is saying that there's enough energy around the concept of not just socialism, democratic socialism, or curtailing capitalism, that he had to say several things about it. We will never be a socialist country. We will born free. We will stay free.
Yeah.
The idea that freedom and having a level playing field are mutually exclusive is kind of bizarre to me, but okay. And bringing in Maduro and his socialist policies, and it's just he spent more time on that than on infrastructure.
And I think it's because it had a lot to do with the polling that he's seen recently, where we're talking about marginal tax rates and where you could see that policies that Republicans fear the most are gaining a lot of traction as people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speak to them plainly, which I think that if you look back at Democratic policies where we start to talk about marginal tax rates and stuff like that, we've talked about them before. This is not new stuff, but whether or not it was Hillary Clinton's inability to be able to speak plainly about them, where people understood them,
or so passionately
about them that people understood them, and you've seen Representative Ocasio-Cortez talk about that in a plain way that people actually care about and actually understand it.
And
in a
people
Schoolhouse
are
Rock type
maybe
of way.
open to it because they've let ultra capitalism, or whatever you want to call this American strain of capitalism, do its thing. Supposedly we're like doing the best that's ever possible, lowest unemployment for everybody, and wages are up, which they're pathetically up. And if this is the best time in America, and so many people are really just barely making it, then they're going to be open to something new, even if it's not socialism. This is the thing is that I see what the right tends to do is anything that sounds like a curtailing of capitalism is automatically dubbed socialism, when it is absolutely not. And I wish it wasn't the case, but we can just keep standing strong that socialism is not a dirty word, or that fair policies or fair capitalism is something that we should strive for.
I also think that at the same time, you've got this line of 2020 Democratic candidates that are all saying the same thing. So if they're all talking about the Green New Deal, if they're all talking about Medicare for all or universal health care in some way that Republicans really don't want it to go that way, and everybody is lining up behind it, because most Republican voters in flyover states particularly are interested in Medicare for all. Like, that's a given. How we talk about it is one thing to them, to where they don't feel like they don't have a choice. So we have to be able to explain that piece of it to them. And so I think that that's another fear of Donald Trump as he goes into re-election. He's thinking about how these Democratic candidates are going to be talking about policies that everybody seems to be lining up against. And he's starting now, which he used this speech to talk about socialism, to get it into the minds of his voters, to say, we're not going to be doing that, because these guys are all going to be talking about the exact same thing.
And in terms of 2020 hopefuls, I think that Kamala Harris got into the chamber today expecting that she was going to spend the entire speech mugging for the camera for potential campaign ads, because there were a couple of crowd shots for her where it was just the big, and for those listening, I know you're not going to see this, but it's the big, really exaggerated, like just the really big head shake, and you're like, yeah, that's going to look really good in a campaign ad. This, like, Trump says this, you say that, and look, you always get a lot of that, but and maybe that's why they picked her. But I thought it was very apparent a number of times, and that. Look, I think there was a lot of, as always, it's a very divided chamber. You have people who stand for things, and then people who just very clearly sit on their hands. But it's you always get the good shot when they kind of pan and you see everybody who's sitting down.
That was my favorite, looking at all the faces, really long faces, pissed faces, not having it faces. I guess I really love people watching, and State of the Union is great people watching.
Yeah, and there were a few things where a number of people seemed distraught by what he was talking about, especially when he was speaking about immigration, and when he started talking about foolish partisan investigations.
Ooh, yeah.
I think even Pelosi had to bite her lip a little bit. I think that in particular, he's obviously picking his spots of things. It's like, yeah, come on, we got a lot of work to do. Why are you going to look at any of that stuff? And go ahead, Drexel.
No, I was just, well, first of all, MSNBC, I don't know what the other networks were doing, but MSNBC had a great shot of Adam Schiff while the president was talking about the investigations. But it's always very funny when Republicans talk about investigations and frivolous investigations at this point, as they have gone after President Clinton for an issue that they took way too long to investigate, and then Hillary Clinton and Benghazi and all the email and things like that just came out with nothing, and then their reports reflected that as they came out over the past few months. So I think the difference is that Republicans traditionally, when there have been investigations, have been caught red-handed, and so that's what this president's probably afraid of, is that his party is the party of 100% investigative raid.
Yikes.
Because we have so little time, let's actually talk about the big chunk that dealt with the urgent national crisis, the lawlessness at the southern border, which I believe he said is a threat to the safety, security, and financial well-being of my reelection. So he spent a lot of time on that. And there are a lot of facts that when we're back at our normal time next Tuesday at 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern, maybe we'll have all the fact checking in order. I wrote down a bunch of things that I'm like, is that true? This is literally what I wrote. I'm like, is that true? Because I don't keep up on those things. The 4,000 killings or murders, lots of those things. But obviously, there's two key moments where he's really speaking to the base. And regardless of your own feelings on the issue, Chelsea, do you think that he connected with his base? Like, look, I'm still going to do everything I can to get this done, like I promised you I would.
Yeah, I mean, he had his moment where he said, "I will get it built," and I think the base probably really loved that. But even I was surprised when his segue into this subject was, and now for the national crisis like of our times. And for a moment, I was like, oh my God, he's going to buck the NRA and talk about guns.
You thought
You
that?
didn't really think that.
Could not have thought that.
Okay, listen.
Did you have a magic mushroom on your way over? Come on.
It was like for like a quarter of a split second.
Quarter of a split second, I'll give you. Half a split second, I would say no.
That's what I thought. I mean, that's, maybe the other quarter second was like on opioids. Those opioids are now killing more people than cars, and it just there are other things that are actually like bigger national crises if we want to talk about the number of Americans' lives lost. And one of the really interesting things that he said when he was talking about immigration is that there have been countless Americans' lives lost. Countless? I'm pretty sure we can count the number of murders if there is such a thing.
Or at the very least, you can put an estimate on it. It's like more than.
And the reason that he didn't put a number on it is because it's actually very low. And the highest number that I have heard came from, I believe it was Hannity, was like 4,000, something like that. So, in the scheme of how many Americans are killed by like heart disease, car accidents, opioid, and gun-related deaths, it is slight, and that is not to diminish the pain, the anguish caused to anybody who is impacted by the illegal act of somebody who should maybe not be here. But when his job, as he says, is to protect America, well, let's look at what is hurting Americans, and
it's not you're saying it's not the greatest threat facing us.
Right.
Drexel, when you have moments, obviously every president will do this. You'll have the heartbreaking stories, and we saw the family whose elderly parents were killed in Reno by someone who was here illegally. Again, speaking in terms of him connecting with the people that he cares about, his base, and maybe trying to get just a little bit of the undecided voters, do you think that that's effective in this setting? Like, do you think that he maybe won some people over that, I think that southern border is actually pretty important?
Sure. I mean, obviously he brought up the angel moms. The problem with bringing up the angel moms is that he's brought it up several times before. So to use that same anecdote in the State of the Union it's been the exact same thing. So he's not saying anything new. He's not saying it might tug on a few heartstrings, which is great. And obviously, like Chelsea said, these are families that we should be thinking about. But at the same time, if the president kind of took and talked about the angel moms, but then also talked about the families of those killed in Charlottesville and other places across the country, it probably would have helped him out a little bit more from those undecided voters. Because as an American, what we never see the things on the news about those families that are affected by illegal immigrants. However, we do see those families affected by gun violence and things across the country. And so Republicans don't do themselves a disservice when they pretend like those things didn't happen.
And didn't Trump actually succeed in banning bump stocks finally in the end? Was that something that
I
has
don't remember
actually
where that
accomplished?
ended up.
Because
2018 was so long, I don't even know.
I feel like
It's
it
a
was
great
actually
question.
something that.
I think so, but I don't want to say with any authority. But I think you're right.
But he always would say, he said if we're not that we're close. But he didn't mention guns at all.
Right.
That
No,
was a noteworthy leaving out for me.
because we have under 10 minutes, there's two things I want to make sure I talk about. One, his claim that if he hadn't been elected president, we would be in a major war with North Korea. I like that it wouldn't be a war with North Korea. It was a major war. Country that I don't know is capable of waging a major war. Interesting that he let us know that he'll be meeting with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam. Hey, Donnie, it took you 50 years, but you're finally going to Vietnam. Good for you, pal.
Nicely played.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really why I want to make sure I got the topic in, because I liked my joke. No, but legitimately, I mean, it is something he can point to. He's like, hey, I sat down with this guy. Whether you think he's somebody that you should sit down with, nobody else had talked to him. So it's a smart thing to highlight. But Drexel, I almost feel like I know the answer. If Hillary were president, we would be in a major war with him right now, right? I mean, I feel like
Hillary the Hawk probably would not have taken us into war with North Korea.
I don't know. That sounds like fake news, but you can keep talking. Go ahead.
I think that what we have, it's very interesting to hear the president talk about North Korea, because everything that the president has said over the past few months about North Korea has been the exact opposite of what we find out after the fact. So he could talk about, kind of nuclear, like a de-escalation of their nuclear weapon. Like, yeah, there hasn't been a nuclear attack in 15 months, but there wasn't before either, or a nuclear launch. Like, so I think that there's been testing. Yeah. And maybe North Korea's just been like, hey, we're just going to hold off for a little bit. But it's not like they haven't been ratcheting up their nuclear program. That has not stopped. We know that has not stopped. Not only do we know that has not stopped, the Secretary of State has talked about that piece of it. So when Trump goes out there and talks to his base with alternative facts, he doesn't help himself when eventually you're going to have people like a Kamala Harris or like a Cory Booker or like an Elizabeth Warren or like a Kirsten Gillibrand who are going to be bringing the fire in these debates, and they're just going to be laying that out, and he's not going to be able to catch up to the lies that he has said over the past 3 years.
Every person you said would put us in a major war with North Korea. I just want to go on the record. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Oh, I was just going to say, because I don't do this very often, I wanted to say on foreign policy something that I did agree with the president on, and that was his line that great nations do not fight endless wars. I don't believe that great nations get out of wars clumsily either.
But the initial point, I think, is right. And obviously, it's not difficult to do the math to think about how long we've been in the Middle East, because that escalated after 9/11. And it's a long time for something that, what can you point to what was accomplished? I mean, there are things, but it's not like any great war from the 20th century.
People may say that there were attacks prevented, but that's very difficult to measure.
But that's not. It's not like liberating a people.
Right. 7,000 people have died, which is more than like twice 9/11. 52,000 wounded. 7 trillion spent. Holy moly.
Right. And it's always very interesting to hear Republicans talk about, like Rand Paul and who has voted consistently on funding the Department of Defense, against funding for the Department of Defense. So, but it's also very interesting to hear Republicans clap for a line like that when they're the ones who continuously, and Democrats too for the most part, continuously fund, in this case, $700 billion over the past 2 years.
I mean,
$700 billion each year.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's a lot of money for not wanting to be in an endless war. Yeah, because it's like, what's the point of all of this funding when you could be funneling that $700 billion into healthcare costs, fighting the opioid? There's other priorities or infrastructure at this point, an area where Democrats would have gladly negotiated.
And one thing that I definitely want to make sure we talk about, because it's obviously probably the biggest thing that's thrown in there for the base, is the conversation about abortion and about pro-life issues, which a you can look at the polling, but a sizable percentage of the country that's important to, I don't know how much less than half, I don't know if it's right, whatever it is, that's a lot of people. That is probably the single most important issue to them. And it seems already it's an area where Republicans, President Trump, will be able to make some ground, because you have, bills like the ones that he alluded to, where the facts of it don't really matter, because when it's reported, it is like, yeah, you can abort a baby right when you're giving birth. That's the way people are perceiving it. So that is really an issue. Drexel, I'll ask you first.
Asking the man. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I wanted to give you the most time, so I'm asking him first. All right. Chelsea, stand up. You're going to like this one.
Wow.
All right, Chelsea. Now I have to let you. What do you think?
I concede my time.
He yields his time. What do you think Democrats can do, with an issue where, obviously pro-choice is the platform and that's where they stand? Yeah. How do they handle this issue heading into 2020?
So we start by agreeing with the president that a culture that cherishes innocent life is a valid goal.
Okay.
And innocent life does not end in babyhood. We have innocent Americans, children, women, men, that the system is really not helping. So we should agree that innocent life is all throughout our life.
Sure.
Second thing is if you are trying to take away health care from women and birth control that can prevent abortions, then you are not really helping your cause. I read an article today that found conclusively that the number of women who put in IUDs following the president's election was significant enough to where they can say that it was his election that caused women to go and get their IUDs.
So you're welcome, fellas.
Which, I mean, if that is a wall that I am for.
The IUD wall?
Yes.
Along your southern border? I'm sorry. I don't. Look,
that is really well done.
Been a long day.
So, where we might be able to agree is hopefully on the prevention for the need of abortion. We try and minimize the numbers. I think that we can agree on that. But you're not going to get Democrats to be a
no. But your centrist Democrats, Drexel, are able to walk the line of like, I support the choice. I would hope that there are, not so many of them. I know it's a difficult choice, especially male Democrats usually go like, what am I going to say? So what's the fine line to walk where, this doesn't become the issue that you just, get devastated by? Right. And by you, I mean Democrats. I mean,
which I brought up.
Sure, exactly.
I mean, as you said, what am I going to say? But I do think that as we talked about what AOC has done in terms of explaining tax rates, I think marginal tax rate is very complicated, and the abortion issue is not that complicated. It can be explained as long as people understand where you're coming from. Like we saw in Virginia last week, where Governor Northam and one of the delegates from Virginia got wrapped up in this crazy situation where they were talking about a bill that's going to the floor that does talk about where a doctor and a mother can make that decision. Now, that's a conversation to be had in terms of the doctor and the mother, but it should not be legislated that way. And I think that Democrats have to be able to explain, well, at what point do you want the government to step in, and what point do you not want the government to step in?
Right, because when you have a bill like that, it's very easy for Republicans to say, see, this is what they want.
And that's exactly what they did the entire week last week. And I think that your Democrats are going to have to roll out the guns and all. This, I am 100% sure. Let me rephrase that. I am 95% sure that the Democrats, the next nominee for the Democratic nominee will be a woman. So I think that they're going to have to, all the Democratic nominees are going to have to roll out some very simple terms like where they stand on abortion and how best that Democrats will lead on that issue. And I think that's something that they're going to have to do. And they're going to have to use the new class, Katie Hill, and AOC and all those women, to talk about that issue for them as well.
Right. Obviously, Governor Northam spent a lot of time last week on that. I think he's spending his time on some other things this week.
Stacey Abrams' response apparently was fire and still going on right
yeah,
now.
looking forward to talking about that next week. We would have liked to have been able to cover that tonight, but we would have liked to give you more time, but we appreciate everybody here at AfterBuzz who gave us the time. So make sure that you tune in next Tuesday at 4 Pacific, and we will talk more about this, and God only knows what will happen the rest of the week. Drexel, thank you, as always, for joining us. At Drexel Heard on Twitter. Don't be a stranger. Come back whenever the schedule allows. And Chelsea Galicia, thank you. People can find you at Chelsea Galicia.
Yes, they can.
And they can find you here next Tuesday.
Absolutely.
Where you can find me, and you can also find me at Christian DMZ. And the show is at Trump Report ABTV. Thanks so much, everyone, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye.
Our founder, Kevin Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.